Winter of 1942. Eastern Europe. A landscape scarred not only by war, but by the absence of life itself. Villages that once echoed with children's laughter now lie silent beneath a pall of smoke and frost. Here, front lines are not always drawn on maps. They are carved into frozen earth, into ruined homes, into the faces of men who no longer speak of home, only of survival. For Private Emil Novak, a 19-year-old conscript from Prague, this was his first winter on the Eastern Front. He arrived without dreams of heroism. Only a vague sense of duty, and the constant, unspoken presence of fear. The men around him came from different places, different lives. Some had fought for years and carried that history in their eyes, hollow, distant, weighed down by things they would never describe. Others were like Emil, young, untested, already wondering whether courage was a shield or a sentence. Every day, the land itself seemed hostile. Snow muted movement, yet betrayed it through tracks and broken crust. Forests hid danger as easily as they hid silence. Every sound grew sharper in the cold, the snap of a branch, the echo of a distant scream, the metallic clatter of equipment against frozen ground. Even sleep became an enemy. Dreams filled with fire, frozen bodies, and faces that refused to fade. They had orders, but orders were abstract things, sent from far away by people who would never feel this cold. Reality was simpler and crueler: survive the night, preserve warmth, keep moving even when the body begged for rest. Decisions were made quietly. Who shared rations? Who stood watch? Who would be left behind if it meant the others might live? Emil's closest companion was Corporal Victor Merrick, older, hardened by the front, yet bound by a private sense of discipline. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried weight. "The war," he once said, "is not in the guns. It is in the waiting. In knowing that the next sound might be your last." Night offered concealment, but it also magnified uncertainty. Shapes lost meaning. Silence became both comfort and warning. Men learned to listen to their own breathing, to the rhythm of their hearts, fragile reminders that they were still alive. Fear was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It settled quietly, slowing reactions, clouding judgment, whispering temptations to retreat, to surrender, to stop. The front did not forgive hesitation. Yet hesitation was unavoidable. Survival demanded a constant negotiation with one's own mind. Orders continued to arrive, often late, often impossible. The men had to interpret them on their own, turning strategy into instinct, instinct into action, and action into endurance. Emil felt the weight of those choices more heavily than his rifle or his frozen uniform. And then there was the waiting. Days bled into nights. Hunger became familiar. Warmth became memory. Conversation shrank to murmurs, then to silence. The mind wandered, filling empty spaces with imagined threats. Some men spoke to ghosts of home. Others spoke to ghosts of themselves. Emil did both, more often than he cared to admit. Sometimes fear struck suddenly, a rifle crack in the distance, a sound too sharp to ignore. Other times it crept slowly, tightening in the chest, settling deep in the stomach. Every decision, every pause, became a test of endurance. Dawn brought no comfort, only clarity. Frost glittered on shattered windows. Snow reflected an unforgiving truth: they were alone, surrounded by uncertainty, and the enemy existed as much in their thoughts as beyond the treeline. The village told its own story. Abandoned sleds. Broken carts. footprints that spoke of panic and flight. The soldiers moved carefully, navigating not just ruined streets, but the invisible weight of what had happened here, and what might still be waiting. Even the simplest choices carried consequences. Where to step? When to move? Whether to speak? Whether to act? Hesitation could be fatal. Action without thought could be worse. Life became a chain of suspended moments, each one stretching longer than the last. And then, at the edge of the square, the world seemed to pause. Snow fell without sound. The wind stilled. Distant artillery faded into a low, vibrating hum. Something was approaching. Something unseen. In that frozen silence, the mind raced faster than the body could move. Instincts sharpened. Every sense strained. And then, time behaves strangely in fear. Seconds stretch, unravel, multiply. The mind races ahead of reality, inventing outcomes faster than the world can confirm or deny them. Emile felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears, louder than the distant artillery, sharper than the cold. Victor's hand rested briefly on his shoulder. Not reassurance. Just presence. An anchor. They had not yet encountered the enemy, but they felt it. War announces itself long before the first shot, through absence, through rhythm, through the way the air itself seems to wait. The front was never a single moment. It was a build-up. And anticipation breaks men as efficiently as gunfire. Emile scanned the broken buildings, the empty windows, the places where something could be watching. His thoughts drifted, unwanted, uninvited. His sister's careful smile. His mother's bread, warm and impossible to imagine now. Memory became both shelter and wound. Victor understood fear differently. He had learned to carry it, to use it without letting it rule him. Still, even experience left scars, faces of men he had led, decisions that returned in quiet moments. Leadership was not glory. It was responsibility that never truly ended. They moved carefully. Every step mattered. Sound was danger. Silence was worse. The world narrowed to small details, wind against wood, snow shifting under weight, the distant suggestion of machinery, metal against metal, scraping, searching. Tracks told a story, but never the whole one. Someone had passed through here. Recently. Whether they ran or walked, hid or waited, remained unclear. Emile felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the knowledge that every decision would only reveal its cost afterward. The barn stood ahead, dark and waiting. Inside, the silence was heavy, as though the building remembered those who had once sought shelter within it. Cold wood. Old decay. The smell of abandonment. Emile's breath felt too loud in his lungs. War, he had learned, was rarely dramatic. It was patience. It was restraint. It was resisting the instinct to act before necessity demanded it. They waited. Then the sound changed. Metal scraped, closer this time. Then nothing. Silence fell like a weight. Silence in war is not empty. It is full of possibility. Full of threat. Emile's pulse spiked as his body recognized what his mind refused to confirm: danger was near. The barn became the front itself, confined, uncertain, unforgiving. Every shadow demanded interpretation. Every sound asked a question with no safe answer. A breath. Not theirs. They froze. Fear sharpened perception and distorted it at the same time. The mind filled gaps with imagined movement, imagined enemies. Reality and anxiety blurred together until distinction felt impossible. Moments dragged on. Each heartbeat marked time more clearly than any clock. Emile felt the urge to act clawing at him, fighting against the equally powerful fear of making the wrong choice. The scraping returned, slow, deliberate. Something moved across the floor. Metal caught the light. This was the moment. The one that came without warning and offered no clarity. Fear found its voice in that pause. And with it came the question that had followed Emile since the first winter at the front: act now, or wait, and surrender control to the unknown. They did not move. In that suspended instant, the war was no longer distant. It was the room. The shadow. The echo of metal and breath. Time held them in place, demanding a choice while refusing to explain the consequences. Whether they would act first, or whether the unseen would decide for them, remained unanswered.
Silence after tension is never relief. It is its continuation, heavier, more demanding. When clarity disappears, the mind fills the space with its own inventions. Emile felt his pulse hammering, each beat echoing inside the barn, each breath a quiet resistance against the cold pressing inward. He stared into the darkness, searching for shape, for meaning. Dust drifted through a thin shaft of light from the broken roof. Somewhere, something moved, and vanished before it could be understood. The mind seeks patterns instinctively. Soldiers are trained to read terrain, sound, movement. But ambiguity resists training. When meaning collapses, doubt takes its place. Emile's thoughts circled the same questions again and again. What is there? What is waiting? And how long can hesitation keep you alive? Victor knew this state well. He had survived enough winters to understand that courage was not fearlessness, but control. Still, he also knew patience had limits. The barn had become something else now, not shelter, but a crucible where ordinary space was transformed by threat alone. Outside, the war continued in fragments, distant artillery, engines, echoes carried by the wind. Inside, another conflict unfolded. One without maps or orders. A struggle between instinct and restraint, perception and imagination. Every soldier meets this enemy eventually, the chaos within. Emile had expected danger. He had not expected waiting. Not this kind. Waiting until nerves burned, until every sound carried consequence. Waiting until fear was no longer an emotion, but a condition. A shadow shifted. Slight. Intentional. Both men froze. Breath hung in the air, fragile and visible. Even veterans hesitate before the unseen. Fear is not weakness, it is awareness. But awareness, unchecked, can paralyze. Emile's mind raced through options that led nowhere. Move forward. Fall back. Hold position. Every choice felt equally dangerous. The unknown, meanwhile, remained patient. Beyond the walls, snow continued to fall. Trees swayed. The world persisted, indifferent. Yet for Emile and Victor, existence had narrowed to a few meters of frozen floor, to the space between crates and shadow. A stage where consequence waited for decision. Small details grew immense. A glint of metal. A creak in the wood. A breath that did not belong to them. Survival became an act of interpretation, measuring instinct against reason, fear against necessity. Victor whispered something Emile barely heard. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Time stretched again, elastic and unforgiving. Emile realized the front was not defined by explosions, but by these suspended moments where nothing happens, yet everything is decided. The sound returned. Scraping. Soft. Measured. Closer now. Not hurried. Almost waiting. The mind, desperate for certainty, supplied images it could not confirm. Every instinct demanded action. But the unknown did not rush. It allowed fear to do its work.
In that space, war became a mirror. Every doubt, every memory, every buried instinct surfaced at once. Emile understood he was no longer reacting, he was choosing. And choice, more than gunfire, defined survival. Then the shadow moved again. Too deliberate to ignore. The air tightened. Muscles coiled. The barn seemed to contract around them, as though the walls themselves were listening. Time compressed into a single, fragile moment. The moment before discovery is the most powerful of all. A suspended breath. A heartbeat stretched beyond measure. In it, Emile understood a truth no training could teach: survival requires clarity, but clarity is rare, obscured by fear, fatigue, and expectation. And then, in that suspended moment, the world beyond the barn no longer existed. Snow could fall. Wind could move through broken beams. Artillery could thunder in the distance. None of it mattered. The barn had become a closed universe, and within it, every heartbeat felt amplified, trapped between frozen walls. Fear revealed itself clearly now. Not as the anticipation of death, but as responsibility, the unbearable weight of choice, where every option carried consequence. Emile felt every step he had taken, every decision postponed, collapse into a single fragile instant. The mind invents meaning when certainty is denied. Soldiers are taught that courage is action, but often it is restraint, listening, waiting, resisting instinct until clarity arrives. Or until chaos decides instead. Emile had never waited like this. His body screamed for movement. His mind demanded control. The unknown, he realized, is patient. It does not rush. It tests assumptions. It strips instinct bare. War is often decided not in fire and noise, but here, inside the mind, under sustained pressure. Then the sound stopped. Not abruptly. Almost gently. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. A silence so complete it felt intentional. And in that quiet, the mind worked faster than reality ever could. The moment before revelation is the cruelest of all. Time compresses. Life narrows. Every memory, every fear, every hope is distilled into a single heartbeat. Emile felt himself reduced to that point, fragile, exposed, entirely present. And then the shadow resolved. Not a phantom. Not a trap. A man. Cold. Exhausted. Half hidden beneath debris. A rifle discarded nearby, no longer a threat. A soldier, no different from them, caught between survival and surrender. Relief came first. Then something heavier. Recognition. War strips men to essentials: fear, hope, and the fragile balance between them. In that barn, the shadows and silence were no longer enemies, but mirrors. Each hesitation carried moral weight. Each choice revealed something about who they still were. The man raised a trembling hand. Not in defiance. Not in strategy. Simply acknowledgement. In that quiet exchange, Emile understood something no training had taught him: survival is rarely solitary. It is negotiation, between instinct and empathy, caution and conscience. Fear does not disappear. But it changes. It becomes guidance rather than command. For a brief moment, the barn ceased to be a prison of suspense. It became a shared space, fragile, human, unbearably real. The war beyond these walls would continue. Front lines would shift. Maps would be redrawn. None of that paused for moments like this. Yet here, time had stretched and clarified, distilled into the essence of what it meant to endure fear and recognize oneself in another. In the silence that followed, Emile felt a truth settle: quiet, unremarkable, and enduring. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to remain human within it. Compassion is not weakness, but resistance. Survival is not merely living, it is choosing, again and again, when surrender would be easier. As morning light softened across the frost, Emile, Victor, and the stranger stepped back into a world balanced uneasily between danger and hope. A world that demanded vigilance, patience, and the quiet courage of ordinary men facing extraordinary circumstances. If these moments endure, it is not because of battles won or lost, but because they remind us of what remains human, even at the edge of destruction.